And we are officially recording.
Okay, we're of course that's going to happen to me. Are we ready to call to order then? Okay, so I'll call this this meeting of the committee to order. Our first item of business that we will do today is that is the land declaration. We do this at all of our meetings. We acknowledge that King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish people. We honor this land and its people past and present, and we are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous people. And with that, I will just ask that we go ahead with a roll call of the IB board members who are present. And I believe we have 3 at the moment.
So I will call the roll. Okisha Brandon. You're here, Okisha. Here. Thank you. Board member Ben Merritt.
Here.
And board member John Chalmers.
And I am here. And then Alexis, we have staff with us as well for the meeting today. We either have them introduce themselves, or could you do that?
I would love for the staff to introduce themselves
Perfect.
briefly. So I will pass it first to our East King County planner, Mallory.
Well, good afternoon. Mallory Van Abema, East King County Sub-Regional Planning Specialist with the RHA on the Sub-Regional Planning team. I'm really glad to be here with you all. I will pass it to Sparrow.
Greetings all. Sparrow, Edda Carlson, she, her pronouns. Grateful for all of your feedback and see it as a privilege to steward this work forward. Glad to be with you today. Take it away, Abby.
Hey y'all, you met me last week, but Abby Anderson again, South King County Sub-Regional Planner, and I'll pass it to Austin, who just came over to the panelist side to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Austin Christofferson. I use the he, him, his pronouns, and I am the new clerk of the authority. So I am very excited to work with all of you moving forward.
And just so everybody knows, government and government bodies cannot operate without a clerk. So we're really happy to have you on board, Austin. Could you just spend a minute and tell us a little about your background, and then we'll get into the meeting today.
Yeah, I guess like the cliff note is I'm originally from Las Vegas. I recently received my master's in political management from George Washington. I have experience in campaigns, but mostly the operational side of things. So I just hope to translate it over here. Really love the cause, really love the issue, and I'm glad to call the Seattle area or King County home. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. The purpose for today's meeting is for any of the board members who can attend, and we may have 1 or 2 more coming into the meeting, is to get a briefing on kind of the overall look at the material that we have received from the public, from our stakeholders, other governments, providers, and those with lived experience and currently living on unsheltered. So I'm going to ask Alexis to go over that. For the board, my understanding is that we won't see the document today, but we should see it in a couple of days. All 70 or plus pages are still just getting kind of executive review at the agency, and then it'll be available to us. So Alexis, I'm going to let you go ahead and take control of the meeting and walk us through in broad terms the input that we've received.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Chair. And one quick point of just administrative feedback. Do we want to do approval of the minutes at this time, or do you want to wait until we have a few more board members join?
Let's wait until we have a few more board members on. Okay.
Thank you so much. And so, yes, thank you for providing that overview. That is correct. We have finished the 70-page memo of really detailing how we have brought forward all the feedback that we've received, themed and coded out, and also ultimately what the staff recommended revisions to the 5-year plan are. That is undergoing executive review right now and hoping to make that available to this body early next week. But wanted to do a primer today on the elements of what you can expect to see, because it is a beefy document, as we do. And so wanted to do a walkthrough of here's what you're going to can expect, and here's a little bit of how to make sense of what the nature of the recommendations that we're putting forward. And we'll also talk about some of the feedback. With that, I'm going to share my screen. These materials are available online for the public that may be tuning in. And so to that end, I'll share my screen and get going. So yes, for the purposes of just grounding us in, the purpose of this subcommittee is to review staff recommendations and ultimately come up with a revised recommended version of the 5-year plan to pass forward to the full implementation board for the April meeting. The current timing of these meetings are weekly, Thursdays 3 to 4 o'clock, and they're publicly noticed, so we do have the public tuning in today. A review of the revision process as a whole. We are officially at that yellow box where we are looking at CEO review, and that revision recommendation memo is going through CEO review and will come to this subcommittee for deliberation. The idea again being that this subcommittee will be developing a recommended version to go to the full board in April. A little bit just about the purpose of our staff recommendation memo. Really wanted to document the breadth and depth of the feedback we've received to the board for the purposes of accountability and transparency, and also formally just transmit the staff recommendations of what we believe the changes for the 5-year plan should be based on everything that we've heard. The memo is organized in a few different areas. We have the executive summary section, of course, and then including a background section which really details the nature of community engagement to date in terms of formulating the 5-year plan and throughout the past month and a half as we've been getting feedback on the plan. The following section details a bit of synthesis of the survey findings. And then we have some overall synthesized feedback from government partners, from our provider partners, and with folks with lived experience. The 5th section is a table that details the proposed revisions. And then the final section is a series of attachments where we've attached all of the city letters, the provider letters, philanthropic partner letters. We also include the raw survey responses. We've had a challenging time translating that into document form, but we have been able to do a virtual publish. So there is a way for folks to be able to read through all of the public comments that we received through the survey as well. And so that material is all packaged in as the attachments piece. So all of that is also included. Additionally, we did include a couple of emails.
So look, can I ask a quick question? We've been talking about Mark's update of the plan. Is that essentially section 5 of the report here? Or is that a separate document?
Pardon me, Mark's update?
Mark was going, I thought we had a update that was coming from him either last week or this week. A second write-up of the plan. Maybe I mistook.
We've been putting together, so Mark has been speaking a bit about some technical revisions they're putting forward related to like Medicaid transformation work and some of the modeled options. We have included those technical revisions as, placeholders within the table of proposed revisions. And so that is forthcoming. We're all aligned in that piece, but it's not ready yet. But that body of work is embedded in what we're doing here.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for connecting those dots. Wanted to share a little bit about some of the synthesis of the survey findings. I know last week we had discussed a bit about, geographic representation and lived experience representation, namely the lived experience representation from the survey responses was more scant than originally anticipated. And so our team did go out and do some one-on-one engagement with folks currently living unsheltered and folks who are currently accessing services to really supplement that. Additionally, we did find in our survey responses, we had full representation from the county, but today we wanted to bring forward some of the pieces here around just the level of support for various strategies. This was another finding within the survey responses. And so when we look through the survey responses, you can see here, the blue bars indicate those that are received the higher levels of support, yellow receiving the lower levels of support. And just to give you a sense, in case you haven't memorized what all the various numbers of the plan indicate, some of the areas that have the strongest levels of support based again, just on the survey responses include the strategies within the serving families with children, and including improving coordination between homelessness service providers and families experiencing homelessness and partnering with healthcare and school systems. We also saw here that the high acuity strategy, so how we improve and expand temporary housing and wraparound supports for people with high acuity health needs, was also one very highly rated as popular. Expanding evidence-based programs to prevent family homelessness. Workforce stabilization was identified as a top priority, as well as supporting accurate and up-to-date information around unit and resource availability. And then youth, young adult strategy as well was also identified as a high need, most supported. Expanding housing to meet the need, that very first section also made the top 10, and severe weather response was also identified. And then the last one that was identified in the top 10 was just around partnering with the 39 cities in King County to consolidate and stream funding for homelessness services. And so those were some of the areas that received the highest levels of support. We did see not as much support for some of the following areas related to the web and mobile-based communication channel for program participants to provide feedback on their experience, and also seeing around client data and access. Additionally, looking at some of the YYA strategy was not as supported, so around some of the coordinating body pieces, and also how we can be looking at growing and diversifying the portfolio. So wanted to bring that forward as like this was another finding from the survey responses, but also want to elevate that we did some thematic coding across the comments. I believe in the last meeting, we talked about how we had 2,500 comments. So while we had 640 survey respondents, there were 2,500 comments wrapped into all of those survey responses. And so the team spending some really thorough time going through and coding a number of those. I believe the exact number being somewhere landing us in 1,720 comments coded across those, and doing some thematic coding, so qualitative research, and identifying through all of those that we had about 76 themes. And so the memo you'll be receiving does take a specific look at identifying the 76 themes that emerged and giving some example survey responses that capture the essence of that theme. So that's a little bit about what the memo details with regards to the survey responses. And I'm wondering if there are any questions about the survey findings, initial ones, before moving forward.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to ask, well, I'll ask my question, but John, let us know how you'd like us to take questions.
No, go ahead. I think we have time, so let's go ahead.
So this is an interesting chart. I mean, I think we have to, when I read this plan, there's no bad ideas in the plan, right? So it's like, it's really, I think we shouldn't view the low levels of support as saying we shouldn't do this. I don't think there's anything in the plan that we necessarily shouldn't do. It's really a question about prioritization and then the details on implementation. One of the interesting things about the plan, and as it's written, is there's quite a lot in there. And while there are all good ideas, there are certain things embedded that do represent quite major policy shifts that I wonder if people are reacting to. And one of those is actually 7.2, which is not on this chart. So two questions, like, is there a reason why 7.2 and 7.3 aren't on here? Let me pause there real quick and then I'll.
So not all of the strategies in the plan are listed on this chart. These are just the top 10 most supported and
Oh.
5 least supported. So that's just what is scoped in.
Oh, okay, got it. And so that is interesting. Just for the 7.2 is the strategy to move all shelter entry into coordinated entry, which I think is quite a big policy change. If we do that, coordinated entry today is really only used for the PSH programs, I believe. And so, you know, that's just an example of the kind of thing that really needs to be discussed before it becomes the official policy of the RHA. And I think there's many other things like that we can get into in detail once we get into the further levels of analysis. You know, in addition to these specific kind of goal area measures of support or not support, did we ask questions around kind of the overarching, some of the fundamental data that we're basing these plans on? So like, for example, there's that whole long section on measurement and context. Did we get a sense of the degree of support or engagement or understanding for those sections? As well as the other big piece is the funding, which I know has come up a lot in the public discourse around this.
So to your question first about questions about some of the overarching sections, like around background and the methodology, for example, the questions in the survey were limited to the specific strategies. So the short answer is no, we don't have survey responses in response to that. However, we did get some pretty robust feedback in other channels and pathways from the Lunch and Learns, for example, and in provider feedback about those pieces. And so feedback related to that has been integrated. And then apologies, your second question, if you could remind me one moment.
Just the budgeting. I think that's kind of a big piece that we have to decide on.
Yes, there was very robust feedback in the survey with regards to the funding, specifically a lot of feedback and comments related to just cost effectiveness, concern about the amount that is listed in the plan. It was a major theme throughout. And that came through very strongly in the survey.
Oh, Keisha, do you have a question at all? Especially if you're only going to be with us till the bottom of the hour.
Not necessarily yet. I'm kind of just following along, taking notes.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask this. Input that came not necessarily through the survey, but in the form of letters, like some of those that we've seen from suburban cities. I think King County was supposed to be getting some remarks in here soon if they haven't already come in. Are those incorporated into this, or is this just the survey?
This slide in front of you is just the survey.
Okay.
The memo itself brings together all of the letters, all of the feedback, our notes from our Lunch and Learns, all of those pieces have been incorporated. So this slide specifically is just related to survey responses, but also to board member Meritz's point about, you know, the areas in the plan and how we also like incorporate and honor what has been elevated in the surveys. This is helpful information as we think about prioritization of activities, what's happening year one and so on. And so that's how we're really interpreting and bringing forward, implementing what the feedback from the public.
Super. Okay, let's continue on then with your presentation.
Thank you. And so a little bit about what you can expect to see in terms of the proposed recommendations. So this is kind of a snippet of the table you can expect to see. It'll be included in the full memo once it is released to this body and to the public. There are about 80 draft proposed revisions to the plan. So you can see this table enumerates the change, the area of the plan that would be changed. We have categorizations of the types of changes, and then we have what the change specifically is, and then which kind of stakeholder group put forward that recommendation or identified it. to walk through the different types of proposed revisions, we first have new strategy. There was identification of some new strategies throughout this process that really were speaking to gaps that partners saw in the plan and that needed to be addressed. We then have what is a substantive policy change. So kind of again to Ben Merritt's point, board member Merritt's point about some of the areas of the plan, if changed, would have a substantive policy implication related to funding or operations. And so marking those changes as substantive policy change really on the basis of this would change things operationally or from a budget standpoint. Then we have an area called technical revision. Technical revision really refers to adding clarifying information, background information, and so on. So like definitions, background information to support. I think a good example of this is around what was just raised about the strategy listing coordinated entry, realizing that the interpretation of that strategy as it's currently written is that not how fully staff intended for it. So like adding that, adjusting the language to make sure intent matches fully. That's marked as a technical revision. And then we have more editorial pieces. So things like reordering things for flow or striking out some really specific details just and, pulling it to a more general level. So those are the 4 categorizations of the proposed revisions that will be in your table of 80 changes to consider.
Alexis, where would you put in something like making the budget much more clear?
Thank you for that. That is marked as, so we do have a placeholder, and let me put in, so we do have within the current version of the table, the piece around the modeled funding options is included in there. And I believe we have it marked, apologies. And I wonder if someone from my team will find it before me. Give me one moment. I believe we have it as a technical revision, but give me one moment.
I mean, my feedback on this is there might be like a 5th area, which is really just kind of like the framework for how the plan is presented, which I think if we focused it much more on the just like what I might refer to as like a business plan, where we show how many units we need, how much we're building by year, how much they're going to cost, then specifically for that main goal area number 1, we might be able to put to rest a lot of the other questions that could be addressed through these other things.
So this is currently marked as a technical revision, the preparing of funding options that related to the modeling. And this is currently marked as a sponsoring stakeholder looking at, again, board member, community member, elevated feedback, as well as feedback from government partners. Any follow-up to that, board member?
Yeah, I mean, I calling it a technical revision, I think might just might downplay it a little bit. It kind of feels like a category in its own right, because it would basically be a restructuring of the plan. And I similarly to that, I think there's a significant policy decision that the board needs to make around what numbers are we going to use to measure our success. There's been a lot of different numbers that have been thrown around, from 7,000 unsheltered in the PIC count up to 60,000 people experiencing homelessness. We've just got to figure out which of those numbers do we want to use, and that's a decision that will flow into all other aspects of the planning. So those just feel like really big things that have to get determined. Maybe that's a strategy piece. I don't know.
Definitely bring that forward as this is currently going through executive review, and will likely have a couple of edits associated with it. Can look at really elevating the importance of that decision to a potential new category. So thank you.
Okay, do you want to continue on?
And so some of the, just wanted to elevate some of the notable proposed revisions. There is some discussion about reordering the goals for the purposes of flow, as we've been working with some folks on the communications front to better tell the story and make, the case for what we're doing together. There was also a identification to add potentially a goal 8. This goal 8 would capture how community and the broad public can also be a part of the solution, and how folks can really we can all be moving together. And so this was also something identified. I'm thinking about a number of the regional table meetings that we've had where there's been a real identification of like, what can the broad public do also to be a part of the solution. We've talked a little bit about the Medicaid foundational community support strategy being written up and integrated as and really elevated more so as a strategy to better leverage federal funding resources to supplement our system. And then severe weather strategies also really coming forward as we are in how many days, looking at my team, how many days of severe weather response. It is very cold outside, and I keep seeing a headline, we're going to get snow. So this continues to be a major body of work, and partners really have elevated the need to have stronger severe weather strategy. And then in response to what was raised in a previous meeting here from Board Member Pastor Carrie Anderson around a faith-based partner strategy, the team has put our heads together to think through what are some ways faith communities could be a part of also solution, and wanted to bring forward some of that today for discussion. So that kind of caps my presentation. I do have some questions to consider. I have 2 topics for the board to discuss today. And again, want to reiterate that the full memo with recommendations is coming once it is done with executive review, and should be ready days in advance of our next meeting, paired with also a kind of schedule of when we'll be taking up matters. And so getting into those more substantive policy conversations starting next week, but wanted to give this overview for today and have a discussion around this potential goal 8 and some of the faith-based partner strategy. But before going into the discussion items, wondering if there's any questions about the overview and kind of primer that I walked through regarding the memo that's to come.
I'm good with the overview. How about let's see, is Akeisha still with us? Akeisha, are you okay?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
It's a little noisy, but I was wondering about with the notable proposed revisions, what about the criminal justice system from being from going from being in the system to whether it be going home or back into homelessness? Have we talked a little bit about that? Is that any part of the plan?
Thank you for raising that, board member. So there's areas of the plan that speak to explicitly that, like folks who are exiting incarceration who may also be experiencing homelessness. So there's a few areas of the plan where there's reference to that related to like setting standards of care, specific programs, and just identifying strategies to support folks who are navigating those systems. There's also some reference to, and there's some reference to explicitly around strategies on how we work with criminal justice systems. And so it's currently, that's the form that it is currently taking place.
Thank you. And I just want to also mention that it's not just men, there's women, there's youth as well.
Thank you for voicing that.
And Ben, did you have anything more?
Yeah, I think that this is a good summary. I really like these notable proposed revisions, and I think this is something that we can talk about more broadly. The 2 things that I would add to this list that I think have come up as to the standard of notable would be the tiny house village question. Right, we've had a huge amount of input from the public around what should the role of tiny house villages be in our crisis response system, and I think it's something that we just have to take head on. I know there's differences of opinion there, but getting to some consensus will allow us to move forward. And then similarly to that, the question of the budget. and the overall levels of spending that we want to contemplate in the plan. We've heard Mayor Harrell talk about asking for a plan that has something on the order of the current spending with 10 to 20% growth, and we've heard Board Chair Simha say that he likes the aspirational level of the plan. I think that we just have to decide, because we have to come up with a real concrete plan with real goals, and because those goals are going to have to be paid for, we have to decide on the size and scale of what we want to take on before we move too far down the path. So those two things, tiny house villages and just overall spending levels, I think are rise to the level of notable.
Yes, thank you for elevating that. And yes, there is, you will see in the memo that is to come a proposed way that we can address specifically the concerns that have been raised about THBs. And I remember for the public that is also tuning in, I know in our session last week did review and really elevate that, a lot of the feedback, namely from the survey and from provider partners, just elevating this issue as well. And so we have taken that very seriously and are working on a proposed solution.
I would say one of the other issue areas that has come up in addition to that is the congregate shelter. And I know that's very important to the East Side cities and those who represent the East Side. All of our shelters are congregate. They're full 100% of the time. But one thing that has been done is I think there's been a good connection to the services that people need, including when we get into the new shelter here in Bellevue in May. Some of that is going to be right on scene. So I would hope that we have some discussion about that. And I saw today a memo that came through that said shelters are essentially, with the severe weather, running at 100% capacity across the system right now.
Yes, thank you for elevating that, Board Member Chalmanak. And yes, that is something we have taken very, very seriously from our East Side partners, and it is integrated. Again, we're eager for you all to see this memo, just want to get it through the proper channels before you can, but we have heard that loud and clear from our East King County partners.
Great.
Yeah.
Since we have a March 8 meeting of the full implementation board, do you think, I guess end of the week is tomorrow, right? Are we going to be able to maybe get this by Monday?
That is my hope.
Okay.
That is my
Well, I know how these work. So it's out of your hands. Staff has sent it on to the executive level and they're working through it. But I think it would be good. I do have some time to read these being retired, but almost everybody else on the committee is working, got other things that are going on. And I just, the earlier we can get that information, the better. Really appreciate that. And really, again, appreciate the really nice work that's being done here. They should really just rubber stamp your work.
I'm so sorry. Can I just get one more in here on the list of notable things?
Absolutely.
I was my notes. The role of encampment resolutions and the role of the authority with regards to encampment resolutions, I think, is a really critical issue that's got a tremendous amount of public engagement. And I think a lot of views from the partner cities on as well.
As I captured. Thank you, Board Member.
Thank you. What other areas would you like to get into?
Wonderful. Well, I was hoping today we can focus a little bit on this goal 8 that's come forward around how community can partner, since this would be a new goal area. Definitely want to get some insight from you all about, what could be some content that could be added underneath this. Some of the identified strategies have been around potentially having supporting volunteer training around severe weather events, also how we can direct folks to really connect with your local service provider and make a meal for your local service providers at shelter, or looking at also how companionship training can also be integrated. But wanted to, again, because this is in an earlier stage, there's a lot of energy around this from community partners, wanted to bring before you all as a board, how would you like to see community participating in this effort to decrease homelessness? And how would you like to see that represented in the plan?
Well, that's a great question.
I think it's super important, and I think
Yeah.
a really fantastic area to have as a part of the plan here. I don't know that I know the answers to those questions, but I definitely support digging into it.
Well, Okisha, are you still with us? I'll let you get a word in here. I know you had to leave. I'm not seeing the participant level. Here we are. Now I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I'm here still.
Okay.
No comments yet. No comments.
Okay, and it looks like Simha has joined us. Is that correct?
It is. I'm sorry for being late.
That's all right. Did you have anything? I'm not quite sure how long you've been on after we got into the presentation, so I didn't call on you. Only because I didn't know that you had popped on.
No, that's okay, John. I've been listening for like last about 10ish, 5 to 10 minutes. Just the little bits of feedback I had were, around Ben's point around sort of thinking about encampments and like as part of the 5-year plan, it does seem to fit into this broader category of like if we think of the spectrum, or if we think of sort of the timeline of like how people are served in the system with like temporary housing and then permanent housing eventually, that front door piece, emphasizing that, hey, what does outreach look like? What does engagement look like? What does encampment resolution look like? Like, what are our strategies around connecting people to the right resources? I know we have that sort of scattered throughout the plan, but I find that helpful to sort of think about it in that way, sort of first stop, like that engagement outreach piece, including encampments, then on to various types of temporary housing, each with their own pros and cons, and then how we use coordinated entry and everything else to move people into the appropriate kinds of permanent housing.
Yeah, I think that there, I mean, I kind of building on what you're saying, oh, no, Keisha has her hand up. Go ahead, Keisha, please, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's really loud over here, so I'm going to try to be as fast as I can. But I actually did, for the last slide, something kind of sparked something in me to say, not just about, how would I like to see like more efforts and support with like as far as outreach, things like that. I feel like, there's a need for more like tools, like outreach tools, more supplies. I feel like there's this, it feels like there's a shortage of supplies that we need to go out and do outreach. Stuff like that help people get engaged and help build those relationships. We need more stuff like that to bring people to the table. We do have severe weather outreaches to reach the masses. We need more equipment, we need more supplies, we need more ways to approach the unsheltered. We can't just go out there and just talk with empty-handed. Yes, that helps, but let's be real, like people want, something tangible. So I think that's, it's not just about companionship and all the strategies and data, like what else are people providing for us so we don't have to write grants all the time. Like we need these things in place, we need these things on deck. So when winter comes, we're not scrounging around for all these things and grants and how to write proposals just to get money to do what we want to do to go out and support people. When summer comes, we shouldn't be last minute thinking about water and, cool, to keep people cool and, the health and sun damage, all that stuff that comes with, severe weather. We know the seasons. We've been living in the season, so we know what's next. we should already have those things in place that we, as service providers or community engagement specialists, whatever you want to call it, they already have access to an abundant amount of resources and supplies that we're not scrounging around last minute. We can just go out there and do the work, create those relationships without barriers, without minimal, what's it called? Without just a little bit to work with, having to rewrite, and wait. We should have an abundant amount of stuff to go out and help the people that we need to serve, no matter what the season is.
So I think, Keisha, I hear what you're saying, right? I feel like you're so close to that, the work of going out and helping people who are currently unsheltered, and you're feeling that pain, and that perspective is really valuable. And I think, Sima, this is kind of a little bit of what I think you were trying to say as well, is there's part of what makes the plan a little bit harder for us to understand is that when we think about the work of the authority, we think about it in terms of this continuum that starts with somebody is experiencing homelessness, and then we go out and we do outreach for them. We create an inventory of a place for them to go. We then help them move into that place. We provide them services when they're there, and then we help move them out of that place into permanent housing. There's that kind of flow of activities that we as an authority do. And I'm really talking, I think, about goal 1 specifically here. The goal 1 area is really all about that, right? It's about reducing homelessness. And so perhaps this is one of the things that we can look at in the structure of the plan is, can we take goal 1 and break it out by area? And so there would be an outreach area in there. That's what Akeisha was just talking about, where all the things that people who are doing the same work as Akeisha need can get that, and we can see that in there. And then there's a separate area on, creating shelter spaces, and that we can really dig into that. And then, there's also this issue of outflow, which is really critical to creating space, right? There are the business process, like of the operational process. I'll try to refrain from the word business, but the operational processes of the RHA are pretty clearly divided into those 4 chunks. And I would also include diversion in there as well, preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place. And so to the extent that we can kind of like see what our policy choices are in each one of those areas, I think it might be easier for the folks like Akeisha who have specific expertise in certain areas to engage on that.
Yes, I just feel like it's overlooked. Because if we talk about a 5-year plan, that's a 5-year plan. But what's going on now? What's needed right now? So it's overlooked, and it's not acknowledged enough. It's not. I don't know. I feel like we talk about support a lot, but what does support really look like, and how are we really diving in on that scope of work? The people that are in between, doing the groundwork. We're looking at the goals in 5, 10, 15 years, but what about right now and passing it? I feel like it's touched on, but it's overlooked a lot about how much goes into that, and the supply and the shortage, and when we run out. I really do feel deeply about that more and more each day, because that needs a lot more funding, that needs a lot more care, and a lot more attention.
Okay. I was just looking back here to see on 8. Okay, how the community can partner. I'd like to just weigh in on a couple of things here, if you don't mind, to the board, and some of them we have discussed in the past, but in this case, it's a couple of things. We're building a shelter plus there's going to be low-income housing, we being City of Bellevue. I continually think of myself still as being part of that. But building a shelter, building low-income housing, and building some permanent supportive housing on a site that used to be owned by the King County Solid Waste Division. King County has long had, I think since like right around 2000, a policy to offer land that is coming up for surplus for housing, for affordable housing first. I will say that was a difficult process to go through. There were some things about it that made it difficult, but we've learned to be able to get through that. And I think that's something that, you know, that government can do if there is surplus property that can be offered and can become housing. I want to go to the churches, and this is another area because what we're seeing with baby boomers getting older, baby boomers moving away, and some of us passing away, and the effect of COVID, we're seeing in many places less attendance at churches. That was being seen before COVID. It's clearly being seen now, and we've got a couple of examples on the east side of where that's been able to be turned into either affordable housing, or the church that sold the property gave the money to homeless shelters. And in one case, a church that was very near where I lived gave over $1 million to congregations for the homeless for a new shelter, and also gave money toward the women's shelter, and I believe toward the youth and family shelter. So that was a way that we're able to get support for housing and shelter. We're also seeing a demographic now of where school-age children, it's declining. That demographic is declining again. And these things just happen with time. Is there a way that schools can be used, especially schools that are mothballed for a time period? They want to keep them as a school because these things do go in waves. So is there a way that schools can be used? And throughout our community, the churches, the synagogues, and the mosques have really been used as a support system for the East Side shelters. I'll just stop there. No, I'm going to not stop there. I'm going to add one more thing. I'm sorry. The Catholic Archdiocese is going through a whole process now. Again, that's been as there have been fewer priests, as they're looking at how parishes can partner together. And while the Archdiocese will tell you it's not about closing parishes, we know that at some point in time, they're going to have to. So again, how do we get out ahead of that to be able to talk to the churches about, think about how your investment can really turn into an investment in your belief system of helping those who truly need help.
So John, you mentioned a couple of different things there. I think they're all good. This issue of supporting the community and creating more affordable housing, I think, is a really important one. You know, I've devoted my career to the creation of affordable housing. I do think the RHA has a role to play in supporting more affordable housing, including deeply affordable housing, but I think it's a very small role, and it's one that's much more based on advocacy and informing other partners around the specific needs. You know, we should be the ones who know the needs of our constituents, the people who are experiencing homelessness well, and we should be able to inform the housing authorities, the cities who are building affordable housing about what they need, such that they can better move out of the emergency housing that we operate into the permanent housing that they need to go and build. And we're the emergency room, to use Mark's term. So we can tell others what we need in the ICU, but we're not the ICU. We're the emergency room. That said, I do think that there's a huge amount of opportunity to help other organizations, including school districts and churches, on the specific topic of shelters. So, if there's a church that wants to open its fellowship hall for a winter shelter for the winter or for year round or for whatever, the RHA should be there ready with ideally some funding, some best practices, some tips on like how to do that. There should be a whole program, right? Where like if a congregation takes a vote or somehow otherwise decides that they want to open up a shelter in their thing, that should be easy for them to do, and they should be able to get plugged in almost immediately into our systems to start helping people get in there and get out of the cold. And similarly, it's challenging to find opportunities to volunteer as an individual. When I first started getting brought into the RHA process, the first thing I wanted to do was go out and volunteer and just help and learn. And you kind of hear about like families going to work in soup kitchens. Turns out like that's actually pretty hard to do. There aren't really like soup kitchens like that have volunteers around here. At least I wasn't able to find that. And so to the extent that there are service providers that want volunteer work, I totally think it would be appropriate for the RHA to create some kind of clearinghouse to get people involved, because a lot of the issues that we have in our society here around homelessness is just a dehumanization of the people who are experiencing homelessness. And to the extent that we can just get people together, humans in the same place working together, I think a lot of that, the volume on that debate will decrease quite a bit, and we can start moving towards more pragmatic solutions.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily suggesting that the KCRHA be involved in all of that, but I think it's just ways that those communities can be involved, and we may not have anything to do with it. It might be, an organization working through their city, that type of thing to provide help.
Great. I mean, it's critical. It has to happen. So I definitely support that.
So we are at the 1 hour mark. Do we have any board members who would like to weigh in on another of the topics or any of the other ones?
John, may I just
of course
share a little bit of a through line I was kind of hearing a little bit from Okisha's comments about like ensuring that you have the right tools to do outreach, to Ben's comment about like, hey, how do you create a blueprint for people to easily stand up shelter? I think this is one of the areas where KCRHA really has a phenomenal opportunity to lead, right? There are better and worse ways to do a lot of this stuff, right? The best way to run a shelter, or better ways to run shelters, better ways to do outreach and engagement, have some basic tools to them, and to be able to write those down and create some standardization and ways and standards, frankly, for people to follow, I think is an area where but I think we'll continue to see some growth at KCRHA. Anyway, I'll stop there.
All right, guys, I have to go. Bye.
Subcommittee Chair Chalmanek, are you there? If you're talking, you're muted and off camera. There you are. Oh, you're still muted, I'm afraid.
I got off of that. Okay. There's an individual in the chat, Ruby, and I'm not quite sure. She says she just joined the System Performance Committee. I'm not 100% certain what all of these things are. So, but I think she has an idea or something that she wanted to share. I don't see her as being in as a participant or a panelist. So I don't know if there's some way that she could just share that with us in the chat, writing it quickly, and we could pick up on that from there. Because we actually, one of the things with this is an hour for the board members to kind of get updated and go over some of the things that are in the plan. But if she could do that and then you could capture her thought, that would be great. Or she could send it into the KCRHA.
I will put my contact information in the chat as well if Ruby would like to follow up with me offline to discuss.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Is there any other business to come before the committee? And is there any objection to adjournment? I am seeing none, so we are adjourned. Thank you so much. And thanks for your participation, everyone.
You.
Thank you.